Before I commence to preaching, I just would like to say, will the person who left this little bag of barbecue Ruffles potato chips up here please see me after church, because I need to know where I can get these little bags. You know, because so often the temptation for me is to eat the entire bag in one sitting, and this would really, really help with portion control. So thank you, whoever you are. November seems to be a month for remembering. You know, on November 3rd, we recognized All Saints' Day, a day when we remember those who've gone before. And last Sunday, on November 10th, we commemorated Remembrance Day, when we look back, as we have for over 100 years, on the so-called war to end all wars, and reflect on those who gave their lives in that horrible conflict. And we also contemplate the fact that wars did not end with that war. And we've remembered a few people over the past few weeks, dedicating communion to folks from our congregation who've passed. And honestly, I don't ever remember doing that 3 weeks in a row like we've done this past month for Henry Wright and Trish Homer and Stephen Delaney. So we remember. And today we mark Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is actually, as I said, on November 20th, when we recognize those hundreds of our transgender siblings lost to transphobic violence in just the past year. And as I noted, that website, Remembering Our Dead, which you can check out, is dedicated to reporting the deaths of trans people. And that number goes up every year. In some past years, we were able to name those folks or put their names up on a scrolling slide, but it's just too much. It is too much to bear. And as I said, this year's dead include 8 Canadians and 11-year-old Jaden Miller. And at the time of their death, Jaden had recently begun using their new name and pronouns, but as I said, media reports used Jaden's dead name and incorrect pronouns. 11 years old, stabbed to death for being who they were. Okay, now some people ask, how can an 11-year-old know that they're transgender? Well, how can the bigots know to persecute them just for trying to live their authentic lives? They seem to figure it out. Now, how many of you knew before, those of you who are gay or lesbian or bi or trans, how many of you knew before the age of 11 that you were different? I think that's most of us who are queer. We knew. We knew with certainty. And Trans Day of Remembrance was begun in 1999. By Gwendolyn Ann Smith, a transgender woman who wanted to memorialize the murder of her friend, a transgender woman named Rita Hester. And Rita Hester's murder in 1998, like most anti-transgender murder cases, has yet to be solved. And I would hate to think that they don't get solved because some people just don't care, but I actually kind of do think that. I think that's the case. Now, last week I declined to talk about the recent U.S. election. For the record, I still don't want to talk about it. But I will tell you that on election night, I was up until after 3 o'clock in the morning. Not so much watching the returns come in at that point, but getting texts from trans friends down in the States who are literally afraid for their lives. And most of them wanted to know if they could come live in my basement. To which, of course, the answer is yes. It may get crowded down there. Now, unfortunately, they're going to have to wait until we refill the 12-foot-long, 8-foot-deep trench down there. Do I have a slide for that? Yeah, that's my basement. Because we're having to replace the antiquated clay pipe drains. So that's the basement, and this is my front yard. They wouldn't let me run the backhoe for some reason. Probably just as well, but I have to tell you, as bad as that looks, at the moment, it's much, much worse. Janet and I are losing our ever-loving minds, and I may be begging the garden fairies come spring for some help putting my garden back together. But honestly, all joking aside, I honestly believe that Canada is going to see trans people seeking to come here from the U.S. for asylum because they're becoming increasingly unsafe down there. And there is, in fact, actual precedent for this already. After the election, I was talking to Dave Carr, who heads up our refugee program, to see if this was a real possibility, because it's a little complicated, because Canada has always regarded the U.S. as what they call a safe country. Yeah, but I think we can all see that it's becoming increasingly unsafe for some people. You may have noticed. Can I get an amen? Yeah, that's a sad amen. There was apparently a case within the past year where a trans person from, I believe, Florida went to BC and made a successful asylum claim on the basis of anti-trans persecution. And I mean, that was Florida, but other states are following in the same bigoted path and will be further emboldened under the incoming regime. And I think it's safe to say that when that time comes, MCC Toronto, through our Human Rights Center, will be advocating for and supporting people who need to flee. At our Justice Jamboree Friday night, I revisited the point that I made here a few weeks ago, that the term neighbor is not a geographical term. It is a moral imperative. It is a moral imperative. When someone asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" meaning, who am I obligated to help? And probably the unspoken question is, who can I get out of helping? Jesus responded with the story of the Good Samaritan, which I think most of you know. And the upshot of that story is that it doesn't matter if it's someone like you, or someone from your country or ethnic origin, or your religion, or a total stranger. Your neighbor, our neighbors, are anyone in need. Anyone in need. Even if it's someone you don't know. Or even if it's someone you don't particularly like. Because in doing the real work of loving our neighbor, paradoxically, how we feel about them is completely irrelevant. When Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as I have loved you, Jesus doesn't really care how we feel about it. Jesus cares what we do, because love, in the sense of loving your neighbor, is about how you act towards them. You act in a loving manner towards anyone in need, and that is a very broadly inclusive category. Thankfully, we serve a broadly inclusive God. And as we commemorate Transgender Day of Remembrance, after having acknowledged the people, or more likely a fraction of the people, who've been cruelly murdered for being who they are, that kind of prophetic word of openness and inclusion is going to be really, really important for all of our community, especially now. And if I thought too much about it, I would be very worried about what the future holds for my trans siblings. But you know what? Worrying is a waste of time. It's a complete waste of faith. Reverend Dr. Brent Hawks always used to say, worry is like a fervent prayer for the worst possible outcome. And that is not the outcome we want, right? So it's not enough just to worry. I posted something on Facebook after the election. I said, don't agonize, organize. Don't agonize, organize. And that's one way of acting on loving our neighbor. And today we observe Transgender Day of Remembrance, confronting the prejudices and systems that lead to violence against transgender individuals or to us LGBT folks, and standing in faith might look like advocating for inclusive policies, providing resources to trans folks in need, or even just educating ourselves and others about the issues that they face. And I know that there are some of you out there thinking, if you haven't completely tuned me out already, you're thinking, well, you know, I don't entirely understand all this trans stuff. You know what? Sometimes I don't either. And you know what else? We don't necessarily need to. As I say, I get my best theology and advice from memes on Facebook, and the Facebook meme that is instructive on this subject is the one that says, I don't have to understand all the details and nuances of what it means to be transgender to understand that every person knows who they are way better than I ever will. And I also get that sometimes working for equal rights and the equally sacred worth of our trans siblings isn't always a popular move. Even within the queer community, not everyone is completely comfortable with the idea. And given the current political climate, some folks think, oh, it might be too provocative. Maybe we should just lay low. But honestly, when has laying low ever worked in a fight for justice? You know? That has never worked. And when we stand up for justice, we declare that every life is sacred and worthy of protection. And faith in action is fueled by love. And love is what compels us to move beyond words. As 1 John 3 says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." And I've said before, justice is what love looks like in public. And the work of doing justice is working to build the dominion of God on earth as it is in heaven. And if anyone is left out, it is not the dominion of God. So on this Transgender Day of Remembrance, loving in action and in truth means not only mourning the lives lost, but committing to build a world, to build the realm of God on earth as it is in heaven, where all people can live in safety and in joy. And it means creating spaces where trans folks feel valued and celebrated. We need to be that place. All of us need to be there. And as we leave today, I want to urge us all to reflect over the week, what can we do to ensure that our faith is alive and active and aligned with God's call to justice? What can we do? Well, we can pray for the families and friends of those we remember today. We can all do that. Even when we can't do anything else, we can do that. And if we want to do more, we can advocate for laws and practices that promote equality and safety. And we can always extend radical love and hospitality to those on the margins. Faith without works is dead, but faith with works brings life. May we go forth as people who refuse to be silent in the face of injustice, and who let our faith be known through our deeds. And I pray that God shows all of us how to embody a faith that acts, a love that heals, and a hope that perseveres. Amen.